theories of ethics. I hope it is brief, so it will be very brief. We'll close very soon. And most of the issues are things that I've touched on in the earlier lectures. Okay. So although there are certain guidelines to assist define the many points of view about ethics, perception of what is ethical and what is not varies significantly. Okay, so what is ethical, as you might have seen in the introduction, and what is unethical can vary. And so we need some theories that will guide us to be able to make decisions as to whether something is a particular behavior is ethical or unethical. That is where the theories of ethics come in. All right. And we have these three major theories of ethics that helps in guiding us in making decisions as far as ethics is concerned. So we have deontology, a branch of ethics dealing with duties and principles. I touched on it earlier. So it is your duty to do that which is right, according to this theory. It is not really based on the consequences that you face or the benefits that you get. It is just a duty that you have to obey. All right. If you remember my example of sex and so on and so forth, you should be clear. Then we have consequentialism. It's based upon the outcome or result of an action. If it will bring more benefits, then it is ethical. If it will bring less benefit, then it is unethical. Then we have the virtue theory. It focuses on the individual character and motivation for action. So the argument of virtue theory basically is that if you develop or if you become a virtuous person, then we can assume that virtue or values will come out of you. So instead of we thinking about the decisions that people will make, whether based on sense of duty or consequences, we should rather focus on the decision maker. Say that if we're to imbibe values, good values in the person, and the person becomes virtuous, then automatically we can assume that the person will be making virtuous or ethical decisions. Okay. So we take the first one, and I guess by now we know the meaning. So basic tenets of deontology. Deontology is generally understood to be the theory or study of moral obligation. The ethical philosophy that believes that an action's value is determined by its conformance to some binding law rather than by its result is known as deontology. So I've explained this. You just have an obligation to obey that law or that principle, and it is not based on the results or the consequences. That is what is known as deontology. You have a duty to obey. So we have these two types of deontology. We have what is known as act deontology. Okay, so they contend that a person overt behavior, which ought to be based on justice, fairness, benevolence, equity, and kindness, must reveal his or her ethical level of ethics. Okay, so deontology itself is the duty to obey. All right, the act aspect is what you actually do. If you were to obey some principle, some ethical standard, and it follows the natural justice issue of justice, fairness, benevolence, and equity and kindness, you will have deemed to have acted ethically. So act deontology is when you have done that which you are required to do. And what you have done required to do follows the general principles of justice, fairness, benevolence, equity, and kindness. Okay. So act deontologists point out that deontological rules simply serve as recommendations. So if you do something and it follows these natural principles, then whether it's part of the rule or a law, that will not matter, because you will have done what is right universally as far as behaving ethically is concerned. Okay, so the act, if it is just, if it is fair, if it is benevolent, if it is equitable, and it shows kindness, then we will have said you have behaved ethically. All right. What is the rule aspect? Rule deontology. They think that while people are making decisions, they should abide by specific moral laws. So rule deontology is that obey, but make sure that you are obeying moral laws. To govern people's behavior, these laws are constructed on the basis of moral and logical concepts. So the trust of this branch of deontology is about the moral laws. And much earlier, I hinted about the fact that even though you have a sense to obey, it is important that what you are obeying is right. So that's where the rule deontology is coming from. It shouldn't be blind obedience, but the moral laws that are being obeyed are indeed moral. Okay, they are indeed moral. Criticisms of deontology. Occasionally, other aspects of a bargain outweigh a narrow sense of duty as compelling. So deontology says obey the law, don't mind the consequences, and just obey because you are required to do so. But we're saying that there are instances where reasoning makes sense. In other words, your duty to obey might be narrow compared to the emergency or the issue that you have to deal with. All right. So right now, I think I've been here from 11 o'clock because based on deontology, I have the duty to teach you guys. Okay. But whilst I'm here, if I was to receive a call that one of my sons or children was sick, I don't think I'll still be here, even though I have a sense of duty to teach you guys this evening or this afternoon. All right. So the criticism is that, yes, we have a duty to obey, but sometimes there could be a higher demand on us that makes that duty not really to be that compelling compared to what we are supposed to be doing. Okay. When a problem arises that necessitates urgent attention, it is frequently challenging to carry out your duties blindly. So this is the example that I've just given, where I might have a duty to teach or do whatever else it is, but there could be an emergency that will make it impossible for me to continue with my sense of duty. And that is one of the criticisms. There are instances that demonstrate how Kant's theory of morality is flawed. For instance, a female employee in Iran accepts a reduced pay rate from her employer for performing the same job as a man. So if you go to Iran, why this criticism is that if you go to Iran, the norm and the moral standard is that females are supposed to be paid less than males for the same work done. So you can have two accountants at the same office, and at the end of the month, the amount of the money that the male will receive will be more than that of the female. And the female really doesn't see anything wrong with that. Okay, so based on deontology, nothing has happened. The employer has done what society says within their context is right. Okay, they have all accepted the fact that once you're a female, you are supposed to receive lesser pay than the male. Okay, but is it universally, is it right? Is it right that male, female will be doing the same type of job, and yet the male is paid higher than the female? But to be considered ethical in Iran, because it's the moral standard that employers in Iran are following. And there lies in the flaw of deontology. When you just follow laws blindly or standards blindly without actually investigating whether those moral standards are moral in the first place. Okay. Then close to that, following your boss's order for your own duties mindlessly is not a desirable behavior. The duties could be unethical or wrong. I hinted on this much earlier. So deontology says, obey whatever your boss or master says, right? And then you'll be considered unethical. But there may be instances where what your boss is asking you to do is wrong or unethical. What do you do? Based on deontology, don't question, just do what you are asked to do. And that is one of the criticisms of deontology. What if what your superiors are asking you to do is actually unethical? Okay. Right. So we have another big umbrella type of theory known as teleological theory. So it combines consequentialism and utilitarianism. I think much earlier, Idris was trying to refer to utilitarianism and use some term. Okay. So the trust is that whether something will be, a behavior will be ethical or not, based on teleological theories, will be based on the results that you expect from that particular action or behavior. Okay. Consequentialism focuses on negative consequences. Utilitarianism focuses on the benefits that you get. So both of them are teleological theories or schools of philosophy of ethics. One looking at negative consequences, punishment or repercussions that you get from that behavior, and utilitarianism focusing on the benefits that majority of people will get from that particular behavior. So types, when we take the utilitarianism that look for more happiness or goodness for majority of people, it consists of two types, okay? The act utilitarianism and the rule utilitarianism, just like we saw under deontology, okay? So act utilitarianism, it holds that a course of action becomes more morally right when it produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people, all right? So an act is morally right once it produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people, as opposed to rule utilitarianism, which holds that the morality of a course of action depends on the soundness of the rules that permit it to achieve the greatest good. So in act utilitarianism, whenever you behave in a certain way and it will lead to greater number of good to the greater number of people, we can conclude that you have behaved ethically. But if you take the rule aspect, it is questioning whether the rule that you obeyed that resulted in the greater good to the greater number of people itself is a good rule or a sound rule. If you want sound law that was obeyed. Okay.
Please, can you come again?
So act utilitarianism just focuses on the acts. Once you behave or take some actions, take some decisions, and those decisions will produce greater good for the greatest number of people, you will have deemed to have acted ethically. So that is the act dimension, okay? The rule utilitarianism is still interested in you getting the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people, but it now wants to find out whether the rule that led to you being able, the action that you took, okay, the standard that you followed, was it sound enough that resulted in the greatest good to the greatest number of people? So this time, we are not just blindly looking for greatest good for the greater number of people, but the rule that governed that particular act, is it sound in the first place? For example, if you take, that will fall under deontology. I was going to use the female employer thing. But if we can turn it upside down and say that paying, for example, paying less amount of money to more females could result into you employing a lot of people, because if they were female, they will be paid less. Okay. So based on act utilitarianism, we can assume that you'll be doing greater good to more people, more especially if they are female in Iran, because they will be paid less. But then when we come to the rule, we want to ask ourselves whether that rule or that standard of even paying female less is something that is right, even though it may lead to you being able to employ a lot of people. Do we get that? Is it clear now? Anne,
Yes, please.
is it clear? Or was it Mami Sewawa?
Yes, bro.
Okay. Right. So act utilitarianism, it holds that it is okay to breach a rule as long as it delivers a greater good. Do you get the difference? So with the act, whatever I'll do, that will lead to greater good to greater number of people. That is fine. In contrast, rule utilitarianism, which carries the idea that if a rule cannot result in greater good, breaking it will not either. So rule utilitarianism is questioning the rule in question, whether that rule will result in greater good to greater number of people. If it won't result in greater good to greater number of people, then that rule itself is not right, okay, and therefore deserves to be disobeyed. So if you remember our example of bus driving, do you remember that? That might help here. Where we said if you met one person on the road and you were torn between killing the person and saving, say, 40 people in the bus, or applying your brake appropriately and killing the 40 people. All right. So act utilitarianism says once you have done that, killed that person, it doesn't really matter whether you've broken another law, because you have actually saved more people. You have brought greater good to greater number of people. Rule utilitarianism will now go to the law of murder that talks about the fact that you shouldn't murder at any point in time. There is no justification for murdering. And I don't think there is traffic laws that says that under that circumstance, you can kill that one person in order to save several other persons, okay? So if the rule of not killing is such that by that particular rule, it won't bring greater good to the people, what the rule utilitarianism is saying is that that rule itself is something that is questionable. It is not a rule that deserves any form of obedience, okay? So this is in contrast with rule utilitarianism, which carries the idea that if a rule cannot result in greater good, breaking it will not either, okay? So that rule doesn't deserve really your attention, because either way, it will not bring greater good to people. So the rule focuses on the nature of the rule that you're seeking to obey or break. The act utilitarianism focuses on just your act, whether that act can lead to greater good to greater number of people. Okay. Criticisms of utilitarianism theory. Given that you cannot maximize two numbers simultaneously, the theory is illogical. So the theory says greater good for greater number of people, right? But we know that in economics, because resources are scarce, if you want to maximize benefit for people, you have to narrow down to fewer number of people. So it's very difficult to make everybody happy, like free SHS and the repercussions that are happening to us now. All right. You can maximize happiness when you concentrate on few people. So the theory is not quite logical, because normally it's difficult. Resources are scarce, so you can't give greater good to greater number of people at the same time. Do you get a sense in the criticism? Is it clear? I want the feedback. Is it clear?
Prof, please, can you come again with the criticisms?
So what I'm saying is that in economics, we know that resources are scarce. Even right now in this class, how many are we now? We are 12. Okay, so if we had 120,000, how many will each of us get? 120,000, we're sharing among 12 of us. How much will we each get? Oh, hurry up.
10,000.
10,000, right? 120, if we were to
Yes.
increase to 24, how many will we each get?
5,000.
5,000. Okay, so the more we become with the same amount of resources, the lesser each of us will get. But if the number also decreases to say 6, with that same amount of money, we'll get more money. Okay, so it is not logical to say that you want to bring greater good to greater number of people. Normally, you can only bring greater good to smaller number of people. All right. So that is why it is illogical as a theory. Then the other criticism is the concept of utility. So utility is essentially a subjective concept. There is no acceptable definition of good. So the theory says you want to bring greater good to greater number of people. The question is, from whose perspective are you defining the greater good or happiness? Okay, people view happiness and what is good from different perspectives. To somebody, it's all about money. To others, it's not about money. It's about freedom to be able to make their decisions and so on and so forth. So if you say you want to bring greater good to greater number of people, what really do you mean? Because people define goodness or good from their own perspective. I normally give an example of where employees who are supposed to be transferred to another place to probably go and head a branch where they may get more status, more money, have declined because they value the time that they will have with their family to be far more important than money. Okay, but the same thing will not apply to somebody. Some people will prefer even traveling abroad just because they want to make more money and then leave their family behind. So if you're talking about the concept of good or happiness, from whose perspective, that is another criticism of this theory. Okay, so the concept of happiness or good means different things to different people. Okay, are we clear? Don't get tired though. Are you following?
Yes, please.
Okay. This topic is not that lengthy, so we'll be finishing soon. So please pay attention. According to utilitarianism, the end always outweighs the means. That is another criticism. So it's basically about we getting more good for the majority of people. How we get the good, the means by which we get the goodness, we don't really care. All right? That is not right. That no matter what we do, we are only interested in the result that we get. Once we get more benefits, we don't really care about the consequences or the damage that will be done onto others. Okay, so for example, if you were a business owner and your understanding of goodness is making more profit, what it means is that if you have to even sell inferior products, expired products, and so on and so forth to your customers, in order to make more profit, you'll go for that. Because to you, it is about the end justifying the means. Utilitarianism does not consider individuals or minorities. So remember an example of driving the bus and one person crossing. To utilitarianism, once you can save majority of people, it will be right to clear that one person and save a lot of people. And that is not right. Okay, but politicians do it all the time. Whenever they want to make a decision, they weigh the alternatives. How will the public accept it? Once they sense majority of people will accept this particular policy, whether it will end up right or wrong, they will implement it because they are always after pleasing the majority of people. Okay, if you take a policy like free SHS, yeah, it has received a lot of criticisms from experts right from the beginning. And if they had listened to some of the wisdom that they were proposing, maybe we'll have had a better model than what we currently have. But the generality of the people were after free stuff. Okay, once it's free, who doesn't like it? All right. And politicians will go for the majority of stuff. So when even the minority is making sense, because it is about satisfying the majority, utilitarianism will tilt towards what the majority of people want. And so minorities and individuals are normally marginalized. All right. Utilitarianism falls short in one crucial area. Let's say behavior is morally wrong by nature, yet the results are positive. So it basically is about the end. Once the results are positive, then it doesn't really matter whether that behavior is morally wrong. So we have examples of people that commit armed robbery or even sell drugs, cocaine, and later on they come to do philanthropic works, like build a school for the community in which they came from, or hospital and stuff like that. Okay. To the utilitarianism, it doesn't matter that he has sold drugs, cocaine to destroy the lives of other people. Once he's now a philanthropist, that is what matters. Okay. Then we have the virtue ethics. So the focus is on the person's overall character or a person's overall character, how they ought to be as a person, sets virtue ethics apart from other ethical principles. So with deontology, it's about laws that you have to obey. Okay, you have an obligation to obey moral laws, where it is not about whether you profit from it, whether there are consequences attached. No. Then we come to teleological theories. We have two under that. We have utilitarianism and we have consequentialism. I told you that consequentialism is about the consequences in terms of negative repercussions of your decisions. If you do something, then the consequences will be great, you may not undertake it. The reverse is utilitarianism. If you do something to bring you a lot of benefit or benefit to a majority of people, then the theory says it to be right for you to behave that way or take that particular decision. The virtue ethics is totally different. The virtue ethics focuses on the moral development or the overall character of the person who is going to make the decisions. Okay, and it argues that once you develop people morally, then we shouldn't be worried whether they're making decisions based on a sense of duty or based on consequences or utility. Once they grow up to be virtuous and moral people, we can assume that they will make ethical decisions at the end of the day. So the focus is not on what the person is doing or not doing. The focus is actually on the person himself or herself. If we develop a morally upright people, then we don't have to be worried whether decisions will be based on sense of duty or based on consequences. I hope it is clear.
Yes, please.
Okay. So virtue ethics contrasts with deontology and teleology, putting emphasis on the actor and less on the activity. Instead of emphasizing on doing good things, there is a focus on being a good person. Once you're a good person, then we can assume that good will automatically come from you. Here also, there are some criticisms against this theory. The first one says virtues are not enough for enhancing social welfare, which depends on some rights overt action. So virtue theory is about the person growing morally. And the criticism is that you becoming the moral person doesn't bring any positive impact on society. with societal welfare, we expect that people will do something, all right? That will promote the welfare of society. But the fact that you've grown morally, so what? Will we chop your morality? No. Okay, so it doesn't promote and enhance social welfare because it doesn't have a component of right overt action. Are we fine? Are we following?
Yes, bro.
Okay, because deontology, you have to do something, all right? Consequentialism, you do something. Only that you assess it based on your own point of view, whether from the basis of deontology or consequentialism or utilitarianism. All right. But with virtue ethics, you are not required to do anything. You just have to be a morally upright person. And the criticism is that that will not lead to the enhancement of societal welfare. All right. Second point, at times it becomes very difficult to distinguish between virtues and values. And to that extent, virtue ethics loses its importance as a separate branch of ethics. All right. So we hinted on this during the last lecture. Really, values transfer to become virtues. So the argument is that virtue ethics cannot be seen as a separate branch or theory of ethics because they derive all their meaning from values. Okay. Virtues may be looked upon as vice. For instance, in Aristotle's Greece, humility was a vice, but to Christians, it was a virtue. So the criticism here is that even our understanding of what is virtue could be situational, all right? It could vary, maybe based on time or where we find ourselves. And the example is ancient Greece, all right? When wisdom, wisdom started from ancient Greece. Like all of these scholars and people that propounded theories, most of them are coming from there. So during those era, Aristotle's time, it were humble person, humility was considered to be a vice. All right. Whether it's humility connotes that you were not very smart, you were not wise, and so on and so forth. But at the same era, when Christianity came up, Christianity also promoted humility as being a virtue. So the understanding of what, or acceptance of what really means, what virtue really means is another debatable thing, depending upon the context or the era that you find yourself. What you may consider as virtue may be different from what someone else may consider as a virtue. Okay, so that's another criticism. But largely now, I think most of the things that we consider as virtues are almost coming to a focal point. All right. The next one says, a man may possess some virtues, yet he may be a bad man. So pay attention to that point. When we're talking about values, I tried hinting on this particular criticism, okay? That most of the time, what happens is that we have our values or our dominant virtue. And the fact that that person has, or one person has a particular virtue doesn't necessarily mean the person will have all types of virtue. The mistake we do is that we just look at one virtue and tend to replicate it to other type of behavior. All right. So, and most of the time it happens within the religious settings. Somebody becomes a pastor and all of a sudden we think that they are the most honest people, they are the most ethical people. You share all your stuff with them to the extent that when people even travel abroad, and they want to build, sometimes they send their money, their everything to their pastors to help them with the project. There are stories where these monies have been squandered and so on and so forth. Why? Because they just saw one virtue that the person have exhibited. And it is that case with these religious people because most of the time you only see them on one day. Worst case scenario, midweek service and also Sunday. So, and nobody commits sin when we are in church or in the mosque. So you only see good stuff. But beyond the church or the religious activity, you don't really know what happens at all. Okay. So you can have the person who is very religious and yet he's a thief, very religious, is something very bad. Okay. So a man may possess some virtues, yet he may be a bad man. And that is very, very important for us to take note of. Even at the workplace, all right? There are people that are very nice, sociable, they smile very well. Just be careful you don't open up without knowing much about them because they can destroy your career. They have one virtue, which is probably could be friendliness, but you don't know the other bad side of them. Okay, so we have to pay attention to this criticism. Then virtue ethics fails to address the dilemmas that arise in applied ethics. So, for instance, in the case of abortion, virtue ethics does not give any direction. So virtue ethics doesn't provide guidance, whether based on sense of duty, consequences, outcomes, results. No. It basically says develop yourself into a virtuous person. But society needs recommendations to deal with problems. Okay. So what is the stand on, say, virtue ethics on abortion? Should we do it? Should we not do it? We cannot make decisions based on virtue ethics. Depending upon the virtue that you have. Okay, you may choose to do it or not to do it, right? For example, when we spoke about, Mami said, well, we spoke about armed robbers, right? If they rape you and you were to get pregnant, what will you do then?
Yes, please.
Yes, which virtue will lead into that decision, whether to abort or not to abort? Okay. Yes, so that brings us to the end of this lecture. So principally, we have three major theories that govern our ethical decisions. We have deontology, we have teleological theory, and the teleological theory consists of two things. We have consequentialism and we have what? Utilitarianism. Do you remember? Then the last one is virtue ethics theory. Deontology, as the name sounds, is about moral duty or moral obligations. You have a duty to do something. It doesn't matter whether there are consequences. It doesn't matter whether the outcomes will be good or not. You just have a sense of duty to do that. When it comes to teleological theories, it's about the results that you get at the end of the day that should determine, all right, whether consequences or whether positive outcomes will help to determine the type of behavior you should undertake in terms of either it being ethical or not. Then the last one is virtue ethics theory that focuses on your overall character of the decision maker or the actor. And the assumption is that once we get virtuous people, then we don't either need rules, we don't need consequences, we don't need obligations to get them to do that which is right. They will naturally do that which is right. And that is the argument of this particular theory. All right.